Welcome back to DC-Cember, as me and my guests, Velvetjoker and Patrick Palen, continue through the top 12 DCEU movies.
Tell me, do you bleed? You will.
Oh boy, with this one, it's another case of where I like it and I don't, just because there's definitely some good things that came from this movie, but it's another case of where I feel like they put in too much.
That's fair.
Well, this is number 10 for me. It's always interesting with these movies, because Batman's rule is always that he doesn't use guns and he doesn't shoot people, but God Batmobile sure shot a shitload of people in this movie.
That's a lot of people's complaints with that, even though we have seen Batman kill in previous live-action movies before.
Sure.
Yeah, Batman 89 comes to mind. I mean, I think he had some bombs that dropped out of the, that like eject out of the Batmobile.
Oh yeah, and the Batman is shooting things as well,
Right,
and people in the parade, and it's just like...
Non-lethal rounds.
They really like skating that line right there. They sometimes they jump on the line, sometimes they go over the line, sometimes they're right at the edge of the line.
And then in the case of Ben Affleck's, it's like, what line?
And again, we're getting a dark Superman and angry, pissed off, older Batman. It's an angst vibe. Again, like all these other movies, there are good parts and there are bad parts. I did not love their acting together. I thought it was grating, if you will. I've liked different performances from both those characters as their opposing characters, but together somehow they didn't feel cohesive to me.
Yeah, because in a weird way, they're kind of being saying like how they're both hypocritically distrusting of the other.
Yeah, they both easily believe what Luthor is feeding them through different methods.
Superman didn't really want to fight him until Luthor basically said that you got it or your mom is going to die.
I don't know! I would not let them tell me!
It is fairly consistent in an ironic way with Man of Steel, but I know people had their issues as well with that angsty version as well, going back there.
I get that for Superman, he's not exactly enthusiastic with how things are, but you gotta try to be a bit more hopeful because that's who you're supposed to be, but I guess you give and take because it's a world where people are not so trusting. It's Zack Snyder's style with making Superman kind of godlike, I don't know, because it gives me Dr. Manhattan vibes.
It's on my list at number 5. I feel like there's like a oddly deep message they were communicating in this movie, especially if you go with the director's cut. It's just a little bit clunky in the way it's delivered. And having two people who are good, but at odds with each other through a misunderstanding, I feel like that's something that was really relatable back when the movie came out, you know, in the grand scheme of things and the real world and politics and everything. And unfortunately, still today. And so like that idea about setting aside our differences and being stronger when we can come together still is such a relevant message.
I totally agree, and I just feel like they put in too much between like with Luthor, the nightmare sequence, and where Flash just appears out of nowhere trying to warn Batman. But then with the cameos for the Justice League to appear, and then of course with Rhea and Wonder Woman, which is a plus because Gal Gadot knocked it out of the park.
Yes.
A lot of those elements that you were just mentioning, all those little venues, I think they were trying to copy Marvel in being cohesive, and I think they just failed on that.
Yeah, because here's the funny thing. Zack Snyder did not initially intend to try to create a shared DC universe. All he wanted to do was focus just on Superman, but because of how popular Marvel became with the sub with the Avengers, Warner Bros. Is like, you gotta step it up and basically let's bring out Batman, Wonder Woman, and the rest, but we don't have time to delve everything out.
Now, what are your guys' thoughts on Jesse Eisenberg? Because if I'm remembering correctly, he's not Lex. He's Lex's son, Alex.
Now that you mention it, yeah, I think he was called like Junior.
Man on the marquee. No, don't believe it. My father named the company after himself. He was the Lex in front of the corp. How you doing?
So I guess you could say he's not like the typical Lex, but I guess in the grand scheme of things, I guess he is that universe's Lex Luthor.
Right, because they did end up holding him at the end, having him in the jail like that. That's right. I forgot about that.
Right. I guess like for all intents and purposes, either way, he's a kind of version, I guess. And more as we get more of these movies coming out and these different versions of these flagship characters, I love knowing what I know about these characters going into a movie, but I try to also remember that whatever movie I'm watching is it's like a whole new interpretation, and it may be heavily inspired by all of the material from before it, or less inspired compared to something else. So point being, with how Jesse Eisenberg did it, it's not my favorite take on the character, but I can roll with it when I think about the fact that it came out in 2016, and I'm just like, yeah, they would have a Steve Jobs-ish type of young, hip version of this guy.
Though he's a bit too jittery for my taste. That's why I agree with some people thinking he's better off as Riddler.
Yes, I can see that. That would be really good casting.
Especially with that one scene where he was putting a Jolly Rancher in someone's mouth.
Yeah, what was the thing about grandma's peach tea? Like, even if I peed in a jar.
That was weird. Then with adding Doomsday and all this and bringing in the death of Superman, I feel like it was too soon. Like, that should have been saved for a later movie or so. Like, but maybe in the context of story building, that should be one where he dies, but for good. Like, that's it. He made the ultimate sacrifice, no resurrection or anything. I would have bring in Metallo instead of Doomsday, and yet they had the perfect setup to bring in Metallo.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like The Flash, right? Where first solo movie, and they basically, like Batman v Superman, they try to make it this ultra hyper-connected movie for the whole DC universe, and the universe-altering events in both of those movies easily could have been like a third-part plot for a trilogy. But DC and Marvel have been so shy about doing solid trilogy movies for these characters. It was just really soon to have the death of Superman. He only had one solo movie in this universe up to that point.
It was a point. Even with how Doomsday looked, it did not look like the character at all.
It did bring me to the source material, and I know that doesn't excuse the liberties that they took with experimenting on how to present him in a movie, but it did at least get me reading The Death of Superman, which I had never done before up to that point, and I was like, wow, this is good.
Yeah, that's why I appreciate the anime adaptation of The Death of Superman, which came out a couple years after Dawn of Justice. I will say for this, I think Zack Snyder would be better off directing a Batman movie more than Superman.
Aside from the Batmobile sequences, which were pretty controversial, how did you guys like how he was portrayed, like in the combat sequences?
I love that, especially with the warehouse scene. I feel like with Ben Affleck, he was to this day probably the most physically intimidating Batman, because with how much muscle he put on, not to mention, I mean, granted, there's a little bit of padding, but we do have a workout scene with him. And the voice modulator, it fits. Like, I mean, realistically, yeah, it would make sense for you to have a modulator, because how much can you really change your voice to sound like someone different?
You just whisper it like Robert Pattinson.
I understand.
Given like how Ben Affleck looks, it did remind me of the classic 90s animated Bruce Wayne a bit. The only thing, I guess, with his just wasn't for that whole Martha thing.
Yeah, that felt silly and overdone. Obviously, everybody needed to do that.
Stop!
Why did you say that name?
It's his mother's name.
I'm warming up to even those rough parts of the movie, but yeah, I can see why it's an eye roller. I say this as someone who's a fan of the Phantom Menace. Like, I can see what they were going for, because I just love the Batman character so much that I couldn't help but rewatch that movie so many times anyway. I'll connect the dots in my mind anyway that kind of go with it, but ideally the audience shouldn't really have to do that. If the director can do his job well enough, then ideally you should be there feeling the emotional beat as well.
Yeah, this is just an example of what happens when you're trying to figure out what can you do with a character that hasn't been done yet.
Right. Yeah. When I went into that movie, I had no idea Suits was going to die. That was like, what?
I say if it wasn't for the next movie, then I say this will probably be voted higher.
I believe you.
Thanks for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed the commentary, be sure to check out my guest podcast channels. Click the links in the description box to find out more details.